You know that feeling when something incredible starts happening in your life, when the doors begin to open, when the opportunities multiply, when provision starts flowing in ways you never imagined possible, and your first instinct is to shout it from the rooftops, to tell everyone who will listen, to post it on social media, to make sure the whole world knows that God is finally blessing you. I understand that impulse completely because I have watched countless people destroy their own breakthrough by doing exactly that, by announcing their harvest before it was fully grown, by celebrating their victory before the battle was completely won, by sharing their secret before it had time to mature into something unshakable. There is a profound wisdom that Rockefeller understood deeply, a principle he called the secret covenant, and it is one of the most misunderstood yet powerful truths about building wealth that honors God. When you begin to experience the favor of heaven in your finance, when you start to see the multiplication that comes from faithful stewardship, when your obedience begins producing tangible results, the enemy will immediately deploy one of his most effective weapons against you, and that weapon is premature exposure. He knows that if he can get you to broadcast your blessing before it has taken root, if he can manipulate you into seeking validation from people who are not equipped to understand what God is doing in your life, if he can trick you into opening yourself up to the jealousy, the doubt, the skepticism, and the spiritual warfare that comes from those who are not ready to celebrate your success, then he can steal what God is trying to establish in you. Let me paint you a picture of what I am talking about because this is not theoretical. This is devastatingly real. Imagine you have been struggling financially for years, barely making ends meet, praying desperately for breakthrough, faithfully tithing even when it hurt, sowing seed when it seemed foolish, believing God for something better even when your bank account told a different story. Then suddenly, unexpectedly, things begin to shift. You get an unexpected promotion, a business opportunity falls into your lap, an investment starts paying off, doors open that were previously locked, and for the first time in a long time, you can actually breathe financially. You feel the relief, the gratitude, the excitement, and immediately you want to share this testimony because surely this will encourage others. Surely this will glorify God. Surely people need to know that He is faithful. So you tell your family at the next gathering, you share it with friends at church, you post about it online, and then something strange starts happening. Instead of celebration, you sense something darker. You notice the subtle comments, the questions that feel more like accusations, the way conversations change when you enter the room, the sudden distance from people who used to be close, and worst of all, you start experiencing unexpected financial setbacks, unusual obstacles, delays that make no logical sense, as if something is actively working against the very breakthrough you just celebrated. This is not coincidence. This is consequence, and it happens because you violated a principle that Rockefeller understood instinctively, but that is rooted deeply in Scripture. The secret covenant is not about shame or hiding what God is doing. It is about protection and maturation. It is about understanding that not everyone has the spiritual capacity to celebrate your blessing without being infected by envy, that not everyone can witness your promotion without feeling diminished by comparison, that not every season of your life needs to be broadcast to people who are still struggling with their own poverty mindset. Rockefeller was legendary for his discretion. He built enormous wealth while maintaining an almost invisible public profile during his building years. He understood that wealth whispers while poverty shouts, that real abundance does not need external validation, that the truly wealthy move in silence while the pretenders announce every minor victory. But here is what most people miss about this principle. Rockefeller was not operating from a place of fear or insecurity. He was operating from a place of wisdom that happens to align perfectly with biblical truth. Throughout Scripture we see this pattern of divine instruction to remain silent during certain seasons. We see Joseph interpreting dreams in prison, without announcing his gift until the appointed time. We see David anointed as king but serving in obscurity for years before stepping into that identity publicly. We see Jesus constantly telling people not to broadcast the miracles he performed because he understood the principle of timing and maturity. We see Paul receiving revelation so profound that he was forbidden to share it for 14 years. This is not about hiding your light under a basket. This is about understanding that light is most powerful when it shines at the right time, in the right way, to the right audience. Think about what happens in the natural world. When a farmer plants a seed, Does he immediately dig it up to show everyone what he planted? Does he invite the whole community to come watch the seed germinate underground? Does he announce on social media that he has seeds in the ground and expect everyone to celebrate before there is any visible evidence of growth? Of course not, because he understands that seeds need darkness, they need hiddenness, they need protection from exposure in their most vulnerable stage of development. The farmer knows that if he keeps disturbing the soil, if he keeps exposing the seed to the elements before it has established roots, if he invites people to trample over the ground where precious seeds are beginning to sprout, he will destroy his own harvest. Your financial breakthrough is exactly like that seed. When God begins to prosper you, when he starts opening doors and creating opportunities, when his favor begins to manifest in tangible ways, you are holding something incredibly precious, but also incredibly vulnerable. That blessing needs time to take root in your life. It needs to develop strong foundation. It needs to grow deep before it can grow tall. And premature exposure is like ripping a seedling out of the ground to prove to skeptics that something is actually growing. You might get temporary validation, but you will lose the harvest. Here is where this gets really practical and really challenging for most people, especially in our current culture that celebrates oversharing and instant gratification. We live in a time when people document everything, when the instinct is to photograph your coffee, post your feelings, share your location, broadcast your purchases, announce your plans, and seek immediate affirmation from an audience of people who mostly do not care and definitely are not invested in your success. This culture of exposure has created an entire generation that feels like something is not real unless it is posted, like success does not count unless it is witnessed, like blessing is not legitimate unless it is validated by strangers on the internet. But this is exactly the opposite of how kingdom wealth operates. This is precisely the mentality that sabotages breakthrough. This is the mindset that keeps people cycling through the same financial struggles year after year because they cannot resist the urge to announce every small step forward. Rockefeller understood something that most people never grasp. He knew that attention is a form of energy, and when you invite attention onto something that is still developing, you are inviting both positive and negative energy that can interfere with the maturation process. Think about it from a spiritual warfare perspective. When you announce that God is prospering you, when you make your breakthrough public knowledge, you are essentially painting a target on your back. You are alerting every spirit of poverty, every demon of lack, every force of jealousy and envy, every person operating under a spirit of mammon who feels threatened by your success, and you are giving them permission to direct their attention, their prayers, their words, their energy toward what God is trying to build in your life. Now I want to be very clear about something because this teaching gets misunderstood and twisted into something it was never meant to be. The secret covenant is not about operating in shame. It is not about pretending to be poor when God is blessing you. It is not about false humility or diminishing what God is doing. It is not about lying or hiding the truth when directly asked. And it is absolutely not about being stingy or refusing to be generous with what God has given you. This is about wisdom, discernment, and timing. This is about understanding that there is a difference between testimony and announcement, between sharing at the right time with the right people and broadcasting prematurely to everyone who will listen, between giving God glory and seeking human validation, between letting your light shine and putting your treasure on display. Jesus gave us perfect instruction about this when he said to not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. He was teaching the principle that your most powerful giving, your most significant acts of obedience, your deepest transactions with God often happen in secret, and they are more powerful precisely because they are protected from the contamination of human opinion and the dilution of external validation. When Rockefeller called this the secret covenant, he was describing a pact between himself and the source of his prosperity, an understanding that his wealth was not about impressing others or proving his worth. It was about faithfully managing what had been entrusted to him, and that management included the wisdom to know when to speak and when to remain silent. Let me share with you what happens spiritually when you violate this principle, because understanding the consequences will help you appreciate the wisdom of the covenant. When you prematurely announce your financial breakthrough, several things begin to occur simultaneously in the spiritual realm, and these dynamics are rooted in how the kingdom of darkness operates. First, you open yourself up to the spirit of envy. which is one of the most destructive forces in human relationships and one of the primary tools the enemy uses to steal blessing. Envy is not the same as jealousy. Jealousy wants what you have, but envy wants you not to have it at all. Envy is the spirit that caused Cain to murder Abel, that drove Joseph's brothers to sell him into slavery, that motivated Saul to hunt David across the wilderness, that stirred the religious leaders to crucify Jesus. Envy does not want to celebrate your success. It wants to destroy it, and it is activated by premature exposure. When you announce your blessing to people who are not spiritually mature enough to genuinely celebrate with you, you awaken envy in their hearts. And even if they smile and congratulate you to your face, something toxic begins working against you in the spiritual realm. The insidious nature of envy is that it often operates unconsciously. People who envy you might not even realize what they are feeling. They might genuinely believe they are happy for you while simultaneously experiencing a corrosive resentment that manifests as criticism, doubt, or subtle sabotage. They might start questioning your character, wondering if you really deserve this blessing, looking for flaws in your story or inconsistencies in your testimony, not because they are trying to be malicious, but because the spirit of envy is working through them to undermine what God is building in your life. This is why premature exposure is so dangerous. You are not just dealing with human emotions. You are dealing with spiritual forces that use human emotions as entry points to attack the blessing God has given you. The more people you tell about your breakthrough before it has time to take root, the more entry points you create for the spirit of envy to work against you, and the more energy you will have to spend defending and protecting something that should have been guarded through wise discretion from the beginning. Second, you invite the spirit of accusation, which immediately begins building a case against you. The accuser of the brethren starts whispering to people that you do not deserve this blessing, that you must have done something wrong to get it, that you are probably greedy or selfish, that you are probably not giving enough or being generous enough, that you are showing off or being prideful. Even people who genuinely love you can become influenced by these accusations, and before you know it, you are defending yourself against charges that have no basis in reality. You are explaining your stewardship to people who have no authority to judge it. You are justifying your blessing to critics who will never be satisfied. Third, you create an expectation and a standard that you now have to maintain publicly, which adds unnecessary pressure and stress to your life. Once you have announced that God is prospering you, people start watching to see if it continues. They start expecting you to always be generous. They start assuming you can afford things. They start making requests and demands that you never invited. And if you experience any setback or challenge, they begin to question whether your testimony was even real to begin with. Now contrast this with the power of the secret covenant, with what happens when you choose discretion over disclosure, when you allow your blessing to mature in hiddenness before bringing it into the light. When you keep your breakthrough between you and God during the vulnerable early stages, several powerful dynamics begin working in your favor. First, you create space for the blessing to take root without interference. You protect it from the spiritual warfare that premature exposure would invite. You give it time to establish itself so deeply in your life that when it does become visible, it is unshakable. Second, you develop a different relationship with the blessing itself. Instead of it becoming about what others think, or how you are perceived, it remains about your covenant with God, your faithfulness to His instruction, your stewardship of what He has entrusted to you. This keeps your heart pure, it keeps your motives clean, it prevents the blessing from becoming an idol or a source of pride. It maintains the sacred nature of your relationship with the source of all provision. Third, you learn to find validation from God alone, rather than needing human affirmation to feel like your blessing is real or valuable. This is absolutely critical because one of the main reasons people announce their breakthrough prematurely is insecurity. They need others to validate that they are successful, that they are blessed, that they are favored, that they matter. But when you learn to keep the secret covenant, when you allow your significance to be established in your private relationship with God, rather than your public image, you develop an unshakable identity that cannot be diminished by what others think or say about you. Fourth, you position yourself for continued increase rather than plateau, because God can trust you with more when He sees that you do not need to broadcast everything He gives you, when He observes that you are more interested in faithfulness than fame. when he recognizes that you understand the principle of stewardship over showmanship. Rockefeller practiced this principle so effectively that most people had no idea how wealthy he actually was until long after his wealth was established beyond any threat. He moved quietly, he invested wisely, he built systematically, and he did it all without the need for constant validation or public recognition. He understood that the truly wealthy do not need to announce their wealth because their wealth announces itself through the quality of their life, the impact of their generosity, the legacy they are building, the doors that open for them naturally. When you study the lives of truly wealthy individuals throughout history, you will notice a consistent pattern that separates those who built lasting empires from those who experienced temporary success. The lasting wealth builders operated with a level of discretion that seemed almost obsessive to outside observers. They made major financial decisions without consulting public opinion. They expanded their influence without needing to announce every acquisition. They gave generously without requiring their names to be attached to every gift, and they measured success by metrics that had nothing to do with public perception or temporary acclaim. This was not because they were ashamed of their wealth or because they were trying to hide something dishonest. It was because they understood at a fundamental level that wealth is attracted to those who can hold it quietly, that resources flow toward those who have proven they will not squander them through careless disclosure, that opportunities multiply for those who have demonstrated they can be trusted with sensitive information. Rockefeller was a master at this. He built relationships with other industrialists and financiers based on mutual respect and proven discretion. He participated in business deals that required absolute confidentiality because the premature disclosure of those deals would have destroyed their value. He accumulated wealth at a pace that would have been impossible if he had been constantly explaining and defending and announcing his every move to critics and competitors. There is a reason why the truly wealthy move in circles that are largely invisible to the general public, why they make decisions in boardrooms and private offices rather than in public forums, why they value relationships built on trust and discretion more than relationships built on publicity and fame. They understand something that most people never grasp, which is that the highest levels of wealth creation require a level of privacy and protection that is incompatible with constant public disclosure. But here is the most beautiful part of this principle when applied through a Christian lens. When you practice the secret covenant, you are actually creating space for God to get all the glory in His timing, rather than stealing glory prematurely in yours. Think about how this works. When you allow your blessing to mature in secret, when you faithfully steward it without broadcasting it, when you remain obedient and generous and wise in the hidden place, eventually that blessing becomes so undeniable, so obvious, so substantial, that people cannot help but notice. And when they ask, when they wonder, when they want to know how this transformation happened in your life, you are not announcing your own success. You are sharing God's faithfulness. You are not bragging about what you have. You are testifying about what He has done. The timing is right. The foundation is solid. The fruit is mature. And now your story can actually help others, rather than just making them feel inadequate or envious. I want you to pause right here for a moment because I know this message is challenging something deep in your heart. I know it is confronting the part of you that wants immediate recognition, that craves validation, that needs people to know that things are finally changing for you. I want you to take a deep breath and ask yourself an honest question. Why do you feel the need to announce your breakthrough? Is it because you genuinely want to glorify God and encourage others? Or is it because you need people to see that you are successful? Is it because the timing is right and the fruit is mature? Or is it because you are insecure and need validation? Is it because God is leading you to share? Or is it because you cannot contain your excitement and you are acting impulsively? I am not asking these questions to shame you. I am asking them because your answers will reveal where you are in your journey of financial maturity, and they will help you understand whether you are ready to embrace the secret covenant or whether you are still operating from a place that will sabotage your own blessing. Here is what I want you to do. I want you to go down to the comments right now and complete this sentence. My greatest challenge with financial discretion is blank, and I want to overcome this because blank. Do not overthink it. Just be honest. Maybe your challenge is that you were poor for so long that you feel like you deserve to celebrate publicly. Maybe it is that you are surrounded by people who constantly broadcast everything, and you feel pressure to do the same. Maybe it is that you struggle with insecurity, and you need external validation to feel valuable. Maybe it is that you do not have people in your life who understand this principle, and you need a community that does. Whatever your challenge is, I want you to share it because naming it is the first step to overcoming it, and your honesty might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to know they are not alone in this struggle. This community is built on people who are committed to biblical financial wisdom, even when it contradicts popular culture. And your voice matters here. When you share your challenge in the comments, you are not just helping yourself. You are contributing to a conversation that is helping thousands of others who are watching this video and wrestling with the same tension. So go ahead right now, complete that sentence in the comments, and then come back because what I am about to share next is going to give you the practical framework you need to actually implement the secret covenant in your life. Now that you have identified your challenge with financial discretion, I want to give you the practical wisdom you need to actually walk this out, because understanding a principle intellectually is very different from applying it when you are in the middle of a breakthrough and every fiber of your being wants to shout it from the rooftops. The first key to maintaining the secret covenant is understanding the difference between seasons of building and seasons of revealing. There are times when God is actively constructing something in your life, when He is laying foundations, when He is establishing patterns, when He is testing your faithfulness in the small things before He can trust you with greater things, and these are building seasons that require discretion. Then there are times when what He has built has matured to the point where it naturally becomes visible, where your faithfulness has produced fruit that is meant to be shared, where your testimony is ready to encourage others without putting your own blessing at risk, and these are revealing seasons that invite appropriate transparency. The mistake most people make is treating every moment as a revealing season. They want to announce every small victory, celebrate every minor breakthrough, broadcast every step of progress, and in doing so they rob themselves of the power that comes from patient, hidden faithfulness. Rockefeller understood this distinction perfectly. He spent decades building in relative obscurity, making strategic decisions that nobody knew about, developing systems and structures that operated beneath the radar of public opinion, and only when his empire was unshakable did he step into a more public role. Even then, he maintained significant discretion about his personal finance, his giving, and his strategy, because he understood that some things are meant to remain between you and God, regardless of how successful you become. The second key to maintaining the secret covenant is developing a very small inner circle of people who have both the spiritual maturity and the earned trust to be included in your private financial journey. Notice I said earned trust, not assumed trust based on family relationship or church attendance or surface-level friendship. This inner circle should consist of people who have demonstrated over time that they can celebrate your success without being diminished by it, who can speak wisdom into your decisions without being motivated by jealousy or control, who can pray for you from a pure heart without hidden agendas, who have proven their own faithfulness with money so they understand the principles you are operating under. This might be a spouse who shares your vision and values, a mentor who has walked this path ahead of you, a trusted friend who genuinely wants to see you succeed, or a spiritual leader who has the maturity to handle your confidence with discretion. But here is what is critical to understand. This inner circle should be very small. We are talking 2 or 3 people maximum, not your entire extended family, not your whole church community, not your social media followers, not everyone who asks. Rockefeller had advisors and confidants, but even among those trusted people, there were layers of information. There were things only his closest partners knew. There were strategies he kept to himself, because he understood that the tighter the circle, the stronger the covenant. When you expand the circle of people who know about your financial breakthrough too quickly or too broadly, you dilute the power of the covenant, you increase the risk of interference, you multiply the potential for misunderstanding and gossip and spiritual warfare. Your inner circle should be people who have not only earned your trust, but who also understand the secret covenant themselves, who practice discretion in their own lives, who will not feel compelled to share your business with others, even in the guise of asking for prayer or giving testimony. The third key is learning to speak about your finances in ways that acknowledge God's blessing, without giving specific details that invite comparison, judgment, or envy. This is an art that requires wisdom and practice because there is a fine line between being appropriately transparent and being foolishly detailed. You can acknowledge that God has been faithful without specifying dollar amounts. You can celebrate provision without listing your assets. You can share testimony about breakthrough without creating a detailed financial report. You can express gratitude without making others feel inadequate by comparison. For example, if someone asks how you are doing financially, you can respond with something like, "God has been incredibly faithful, and we are seeing His provision in ways that encourage our faith," without feeling obligated to explain your salary, your savings, your investment, or your net worth. If someone comments on a blessing like a new home or car, you can simply say, "We are grateful for how God is taking care of us," without launching into a detailed explanation of how you afforded it or what you paid for it. If people push for more information, which they often will, you have every right to maintain your boundary with grace by saying something like, "I appreciate your interest, but we have made a decision to keep the details of our finances between us and God, and I hope you can respect that." This is not being secretive in a shameful way. This is being wisely protective of what God is building in your life, and people who truly care about you will respect that boundary, even if they do not fully understand it. People who react negatively to your discretion, who feel entitled to know your business, who push back against your boundaries, are often the exact people you should not be sharing with anyway, because their reaction reveals a heart issue that would potentially work against your blessing. The fourth key is understanding that the secret covenant does not mean you stop being generous. It actually empowers you to be more generous in more strategic ways, because your giving is not motivated by needing recognition or validation. Rockefeller was one of the most generous men who ever lived, but much of his giving happened without public knowledge, without his name attached, without any expectation of recognition. He understood that the most powerful generosity happens in secret, that giving without human witnesses amplifies the spiritual reward, that anonymous generosity protects both the giver and the receiver from the complications that come with public knowledge. When you practice the secret covenant, you are freed to give according to God's leading rather than according to what will look good, or what people expect, or what will earn you praise. You can respond to needs you see without announcing what you did. You can sow into people's lives without them knowing where it came from. You can support ministries and causes without needing your name on a plaque or a building. This kind of giving is incredibly powerful because it is pure. It is not contaminated by ego or the need for approval. It flows directly from your obedience to God's voice, and it positions you for the kind of reward that Jesus talked about when He said that your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. Notice the principle there. What you do in secret gets rewarded publicly, but what you do publicly has already received its reward in full. When you announce your giving, when you make sure people know how generous you are, when you need recognition for your contribution, you get human approval, but you forfeit the supernatural multiplication that comes from secret obedience. The secret covenant actually makes you more generous, not less, because you are no longer limited by what people think or what they expect. You are free to respond to God's leading with radical obedience that might look foolish to others, but that positions you for exponential blessing. The fifth key is learning to find your joy, your validation, your significance, and your identity in your private relationship with God, rather than in public recognition or human approval. This is perhaps the most challenging aspect of the secret covenant, because we are wired for connection and affirmation. We naturally want people to see us, to acknowledge us, to validate that we matter, and that what we are doing has value. But when you tie your sense of worth to external validation, when you need people to know about your success in order to feel successful, when you measure your significance by how many people recognize your blessing, you have made an idol out of human opinion, and you have given away power that belongs only to God. The secret covenant is ultimately about developing such a deep, intimate, satisfying relationship with your Creator that His opinion is the only one that truly matters to you. His pleasure is the reward you seek. His approval is the validation you need. His recognition is sufficient even if no human ever knows what you have accomplished. This is the level of maturity that Rockefeller operated from. He did not need the world to know he was wealthy because he knew it. He did not need public recognition of his success because he was not building for human applause. He was building a legacy, and legacy is measured over generations, not in momentary accolades. When you develop this kind of internal security, when you find your identity anchored in who God says you are rather than who people think you are, The secret covenant becomes not just easy but actually preferable, because you realize that the privacy, the discretion, the hiddenness actually protect something precious. It creates space for depth and intimacy and genuine growth that would be impossible under constant public scrutiny. Think about the difference between a tree that grows in a crowded, highly visible location, where everyone walks past it and comments on it every day, versus a tree that grows in a protected valley, where its roots can go deep without interference, where its branches can spread without someone constantly pruning them based on their preferences, where it can develop according to its natural design rather than according to public opinion about what a tree should look like. The tree in the protected valley will almost always grow stronger, taller, more resilient than the tree in the public space, not because it has better soil or water necessarily, but because it has protection during its vulnerable growing stages, because it is free to develop without constant interference and criticism and manipulation. Your financial life is exactly like that tree, when you give it space to develop in the protected environment of discretion and privacy, when you shield it from constant public commentary and comparison, when you allow it to grow according to God's design rather than according to popular opinion. It will develop strength and resilience and fruitfulness that would be impossible if you had exposed it prematurely to everyone who wanted to comment on it, criticize it, or control it based on their own insecurities and limitations. Now I need to address something that I know is bothering some of you as you are listening to this, because I can almost feel the objection rising in your hearts. You are thinking, but what about testimony? What about sharing what God has done so others can be encouraged? What about not hiding your light under a basket? What about giving God glory publicly? These are valid questions and they deserve honest answers, because the last thing I want is for you to misapply this teaching and end up operating in shame or false humility. Here is the truth. There is absolutely a time for testimony. There is definitely a place for sharing what God has done. There are moments when your story is meant to encourage others and give God public glory. But those moments are supposed to be led by the Spirit. They are supposed to happen when the timing is right, and the foundation is solid, and your heart is pure, not just whenever you feel excited or whenever you want validation. The difference between genuine testimony and premature announcement is usually found in the motivation of your heart and the timing of the sharing. Genuine testimony happens when God prompts you to share, when someone specifically needs to hear what you have experienced, when your story can help someone else without putting your own blessing at risk, when enough time has passed that the breakthrough is established and undeniable. Premature announcement happens when you are acting from insecurity, when you need people to know you are successful, when you cannot contain your excitement and you are sharing impulsively, when you are seeking validation rather than giving glory, when the blessing is still fragile and vulnerable to interference. One is spirit-led and strategic, the other is flesh-driven and potentially destructive. One waits for the appointed time and the right audience. The other broadcasts indiscriminately to anyone who will listen. One protects what God is building while still giving Him glory at the appropriate time. The other risks the blessing for the sake of immediate recognition. Let me give you some practical examples of what this looks like in real life, because I know some of you are thinking this all sounds good in theory, but you are not sure how to actually apply it in your day-to-day reality. Let us say you have been believing God for a financial breakthrough, and suddenly you get an unexpected promotion at work with a significant salary increase. Your first instinct might be to post on social media about how God came through, to tell everyone at church on Sunday, to make sure your family knows that you are finally doing well. But the secret covenant would say, pause, take a breath, let this blessing settle into your life before you announce it. Instead of broadcasting to everyone, you might share privately with your spouse if you are married, with your mentor if you have one, with that one trusted friend who has walked this journey with you. You thank God privately. You steward this increase wisely. You start adjusting your giving and saving and investing according to kingdom principles, and you let the fruit of this promotion become evident over time through the quality of your life rather than through your announcement. Then, maybe 6 months or a year later, when someone asks how things are going, you can naturally share that God has been faithful and you have seen some really encouraging breakthrough in your career, but you do not need to give all the details because the increase has now had time to take root and establish itself in your life in a way that is sustainable. Or let us say you start a business and it begins doing really well, exceeding your expectations, generating income that surprises you. The temptation would be to start posting about your success, to share your revenue numbers, to let everyone know that your business is thriving. But the secret covenant would say, build in private, establish your systems, solidify your foundation. Let the business prove itself over time before you make it a topic of public conversation. You can certainly share that you started a business, you can invite people to support it if that is appropriate, but you do not need to broadcast your financial success, or share your numbers, or make your growth a public spectacle. As the business matures and becomes established, your success will become naturally visible through the longevity of your company, the quality of your products or services, the impact you are having, and at that point, your testimony is powerful, because it is substantiated by time and fruit rather than just by your announcement. Another practical application is in how you handle unexpected financial blessings like inheritances, legal settlement, bonuses, or investment returns. These kinds of windfalls are particularly vulnerable to the destructive power of premature announcement because they often represent amounts that are significant compared to your normal income, and the temptation to share about them is strong. But this is exactly the kind of blessing that benefits most from the protection of the secret covenant. When you receive a financial windfall, resist the urge to tell people about it, even people you are close to, because money changes relationships, and knowledge of your money changes how people relate to you. Instead, take time to pray about how God wants you to steward this blessing. Seek wise counsel from your very small inner circle if appropriate. Make strategic decisions about giving, saving, investing, and spending, and let the impact of this blessing become visible through your increased generosity, your financial stability, your ability to respond to needs, rather than through your announcement of how much you received. Over time, people might notice that you seem more financially stable, that you are able to give more generously, that you do not seem as stressed about money, and if they ask, you can simply say that God has been faithful, and you have been stewarding His blessings carefully, without feeling the need to explain the specifics of what you received, or when you received it. The secret covenant in this context protects you from becoming a target for requests, expectations, and manipulations that would inevitably come if people knew about your windfall, and it protects the blessing itself from the spiritual warfare that premature exposure would invite. Consider what happens in families when one person receives an inheritance or windfall and makes it public knowledge. Suddenly, relationships that were built on genuine affection become complicated by financial dynamics. People who never asked for help before suddenly have urgent needs. Family members start comparing what they received or did not receive. Expectations develop that create pressure and resentment, and the blessing that should have brought freedom instead brings stress and conflict. This is not hypothetical. This happens consistently when people fail to protect their financial blessings through wise discretion, and it is completely avoidable if you understand and practice the secret covenant. The same principle applies to business success. When your company starts doing exceptionally well, when you land a major contract or close a significant deal, the impulse might be to announce it publicly to celebrate the win and attract more business. But successful entrepreneurs who have built lasting companies understand that there is strategic value in moving quietly, in letting your reputation be built by satisfied customers rather than by your own announcement, in allowing your success to be discovered rather than broadcast. They know that when you announce major wins, you alert competitors to your strategies, you create expectations among customers that might be difficult to sustain, you invite scrutiny from people who might not have your best interests in mind, and you potentially limit future opportunities because people start putting you in a box based on what you have announced publicly. Now let me address what might be the most challenging aspect of this teaching for many of you, which is how to practice the secret covenant when you are surrounded by a culture that celebrates and even demands transparency, when you are part of communities that expect you to share your testimony regularly, when you have been taught that every blessing is meant to be immediately broadcasted as a form of giving God glory. This is particularly challenging if you are part of a church culture that regularly asks people to share testimony, if you are in a faith community where financial breakthrough is celebrated publicly, if you have been taught that not sharing your blessing is the same as being ashamed of what God has done. Here is what I want you to understand. You can honor your church community. You can participate in testimony services. You can celebrate what God is doing without violating the secret covenant, but it requires wisdom and discretion in how you share. When you are asked to give testimony, you can focus on the faithfulness of God, the principles He taught you, the character development you experienced, the lessons you learned, without necessarily giving specific financial details or amounts. You can say something like, "I want to encourage you that God is faithful. He has taught me so much about trusting Him with my finance, and I have seen His provision in ways that have strengthened my faith," without saying, "I was making $50,000 and now I make $200,000, or I had $10,000 in debt and now I am debt-free with $50,000 in savings." Do you see the difference? One gives glory to God and encourages others without creating the problems that come from specific financial disclosure. The other might feel more transparent, but it actually invites comparison, envy, and spiritual warfare. You can practice the secret covenant while still being an active participant in your faith community, but it means you take responsibility for protecting what God is building in your life, even when the culture around you does not understand or value that protection. There is also a generational component to this teaching that I think is important to address, because many of you come from families or communities where money was either never discussed at all, which created shame and ignorance, or it was discussed too openly, which created comparison and strife. The secret covenant is not about returning to the toxic silence around money that characterized previous generations, where people were ashamed to even acknowledge that they had needs or blessings, where talking about money was considered taboo in all contexts. That kind of shame-based silence is not what we are advocating for at all. The secret covenant is about wise stewardship of information, about understanding that there is a time and place and audience for every conversation, about protecting what is precious while still maintaining healthy, honest relationships. You can teach your children about money. You can have honest conversations with your spouse about finances. You can seek counsel from trusted advisors. You can be appropriately transparent with accountability partners, all while practicing the secret covenant by being discerning about what you share, with whom you share it, and when you share it. The goal is not to create shame or secrecy in the toxic sense. The goal is to create protection and wisdom around something that is both powerful and vulnerable, which is the blessing of God manifesting in your financial life. Let me give you the biblical foundation for this principle, because I want you to see that this is not just Rockefeller's philosophy or some prosperity gospel gimmick. This is rooted deeply in Scripture and in how God Himself operates. Throughout the Bible, we see God moving in hidden ways before revealing His plans publicly. We see Him establishing things in secret before bringing them into the light. We see Him protecting His purposes from premature exposure. Think about how He protected Moses as a baby, hidden in a basket among the reeds, preserved in secret before being revealed as the deliverer of Israel. Think about how He protected David, anointed as king in private, hidden in fields and caves and obscurity for years before stepping into His public role. Think about how He protected Jesus, born in a stable away from the eyes of those who would seek to kill Him, raised in the obscurity of Nazareth, working as a carpenter for 30 years before beginning His public ministry. God understands the power of hiddenness. He knows that what is established in secret cannot be easily destroyed. He values the development that happens away from public scrutiny. Jesus Himself taught this principle repeatedly, telling people not to let their left hand know what their right hand is doing when giving, instructing those He healed not to tell anyone what had happened, withdrawing from the crowds when they wanted to make Him king by force, spending entire nights in prayer alone on mountains away from everyone. He modeled discretion. He demonstrated the value of private relationship with the Father. He showed us that the most powerful things often happen in the secret place where only God is watching. Consider the pattern of how Jesus operated during His earthly ministry. He performed incredible miracles that should have made Him instantly famous, yet He consistently told people not to broadcast what He had done. He withdrew from crowds at the height of His popularity. He spoke in parables that concealed truth from casual observers while revealing it to committed disciples. He waited 3 decades before beginning His public ministry, even though He was God incarnate from birth. This was not because He was ashamed or insecure. It was because He understood timing. He knew the danger of premature exposure. He recognized that certain things need to develop in hiddenness before they can be revealed publicly without being destroyed. When we ignore this pattern that Jesus modeled, When we rush to broadcast everything God does in our lives, when we prioritize public recognition over private faithfulness, we are actually working against the very principles that Jesus taught and demonstrated. We are choosing the wisdom of the world over the wisdom of heaven. We are trading long-term fruitfulness for short-term validation. Proverbs gives us incredibly practical wisdom about this principle in multiple places throughout the book. Proverbs tells us that the wise store up knowledge, but the mouth of a fool brings ruin near, teaching us that there is power in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. It tells us that whoever guards his mouth preserves his life, but he who opens wide his lips comes to ruin, emphasizing that discretion protects us from destruction. It says that a gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy person keeps a secret, establishing that the ability to maintain confidentiality is a mark of wisdom and maturity. It teaches that the prudent keep their knowledge to themselves, but fools broadcast folly, showing us that true wisdom knows the value of discretion. The entire book of Proverbs is essentially a manual on the power of the tongue, on knowing when to speak and when to be silent, on understanding that words have creative power, and that silence can be more powerful than speech. When applied to finances, these principles teach us that broadcasting our blessing prematurely is foolish, that guarding the information about what God is doing in our lives is wise, that discretion protects what is precious. This is not about shame or hiding in fear. This is about wisdom and strategic stewardship of information. The Apostle Paul gives us another perspective on this when he talks about the revelations he received that were so profound he was forbidden to speak about them for 14 years. Imagine receiving revelation directly from God, experiencing things so incredible that they could revolutionize your understanding of spiritual reality, and then being told not to share it for over a decade. Most of us cannot keep a secret for 14 days, let alone 14 years. But Paul understood that there are some things that need to mature in hiddenness before they are ready to be shared, that premature revelation can be more harmful than helpful, that timing is everything when it comes to releasing powerful truth. He also talks about how he had to learn contentment in every situation, in plenty and in want, in abundance and in need, demonstrating that his identity and security were not tied to his financial circumstances or to what people knew about his financial circumstances. He found his sufficiency in Christ regardless of external conditions, which freed him from the need to announce his blessings or defend his struggles, because his worth was anchored in something unchanging, rather than in fluctuating circumstances or human opinion. As we move toward the conclusion of this teaching, I want to bring us back to the practical reality that you are facing right now in your own life. Some of you are experiencing breakthrough right now. God is opening doors, opportunities are presenting themselves, provision is beginning to flow, and you are wrestling with this instruction to maintain discretion, because every fiber of your being wants to celebrate publicly. Others of you are still in the believing stage. You have not seen the manifestation yet, but you are learning these principles now so that when breakthrough comes, you will have the wisdom to protect it. Regardless of where you are in your journey, the secret covenant is an invitation to a deeper level of trust, to a more mature relationship with God and with money, to a way of operating that might feel uncomfortable at first, but that ultimately produces fruit that is exponential compared to what would happen if you handled your blessing the way most people do. Think about it from God's perspective for a moment. If He is considering who to trust with significant financial blessing, who to position for wealth that can impact generations, who to use as a conduit for kingdom resources, is He going to choose someone who broadcasts every small victory, who needs constant validation, who cannot be trusted to protect what is precious? Or is He going to choose someone who has proven faithful in secret, who finds their validation in Him alone, who understands the power of discretion and the wisdom of timing? Here is what I want you to understand about the true nature of the secret covenant. It is not about God wanting to withhold recognition from you. It is about Him wanting to protect you from the destruction that comes from premature exposure, so that you can receive and sustain a blessing far greater than what you would have if you operated the way most people do. The secret covenant is not a restriction. It is a protection. It is not a limitation. It is an amplification. It is not about hiding in shame. It is about building in wisdom. When you embrace this principle, when you allow your blessing to mature in hiddenness before bringing it into the light, when you find your validation in God's approval rather than human recognition, You position yourself for a level of prosperity that is rare because it is protected, that is sustainable because it is rooted, that is powerful because it is pure. You become someone God can trust with wealth because you have proven that you do not need wealth to define you. You become someone He can bless publicly because you have been faithful in secret. You become a conduit for kingdom resources because you have demonstrated that you are more interested in stewardship than showmanship. This is the legacy that Rockefeller left. This is the wisdom that built his empire. This is the principle that allowed him to impact generations, and it is available to you today if you are willing to embrace it. I want to invite you to make a decision right now, not just to understand this teaching intellectually, but to actually implement it in your life starting today. If you are experiencing financial breakthrough, decide right now to protect it through discretion, to share only with your small inner circle, to resist the urge to broadcast to everyone who will listen, and to allow the blessing time to take root before you bring it into the light. If you are still believing for breakthrough, decide right now that when it comes, and it will come if you are faithful, you are going to steward it according to these principles. You are going to practice the secret covenant. You are going to find your validation in God alone, rather than in human recognition. This decision might feel small in this moment, but it will determine whether your breakthrough becomes a flash in the pan that everyone sees, but that quickly fades, or whether it becomes a foundation that is built over time and that ultimately produces a legacy that impacts generations. The choice is yours, but I am telling you from experience and from studying those who have walked this path successfully, the secret covenant is one of the most powerful principles you can embrace if you are serious about building kingdom wealth that lasts. Now, if this message has resonated with you, if you sense that God is calling you to a higher level of financial stewardship, if you want to continue learning these principles that combine biblical wisdom with practical strategy, I want to personally invite you to join this community by subscribing to the channel. I know that might feel like just another subscription, just another channel in your feed, but I want you to understand what you are actually signing up for when you hit that button. You are not just subscribing to content, you are joining a community of people who are committed to building wealth that honors God, who understand that prosperity and purpose are meant to work together, who are learning to operate according to kingdom principles even when those principles contradict popular culture. Every week I create content specifically designed to help you grow in your financial wisdom, to challenge you to think differently about money, to give you practical tools and strategies that you can implement immediately, to connect biblical truth with financial reality in ways that produce actual transformation. When you subscribe, you are saying yes to a journey of growth. You are committing to showing up consistently to learn and apply these principles. You are positioning yourself to be part of a movement of believers who are taking back territory in the financial realm that the enemy has occupied for too long. Hit that subscribe button right now. Turn on the notification bell so you do not miss any of these teachings, and make a commitment to yourself and to God that you are serious about this journey. You are worth the investment. Your future is worth the consistency, and the legacy you are going to build is worth the decision you make in this moment to keep showing up and keep growing. As we close, I want to leave you with this final thought that I believe summarizes everything we have talked about today. The secret covenant is not about living in fear or hiding in shame. It is about living in wisdom and building with intention. It is about understanding that not everything needs to be announced, that silence can be more powerful than speech, that privacy can protect what is precious, that discretion can multiply what is developing. When you learn to keep the covenant, when you allow your blessing to mature in hiddenness before bringing it into the light, when you find your identity and validation in God alone rather than in human recognition, you tap into a dimension of kingdom living that most people never experience because they cannot resist the urge to broadcast everything immediately. You become dangerous to the kingdom of darkness because you have learned to build in ways that cannot be easily disrupted. You become valuable to the kingdom of God because you have proven you can be trusted with resources. You become a model for others who are watching to see if it is actually possible to prosper with integrity and wisdom. The path is narrow, the principle is countercultural, the practice requires discipline, but the fruit is exponential, and the legacy is eternal. Walk in wisdom, protect what is precious, build in secret, and watch what God does when He finds someone who understands the power of the covenant. Your best days are ahead of you, your greatest impact is still to come, and the blessing that is developing in hiddenness right now is going to astound you when it is finally ready to be revealed. Trust the process, honor the covenant, and get ready for God to show Himself faithful in ways that exceed everything you have imagined. Remember that Rockefeller built an empire that lasted for generations, not because he was the smartest or the most talented, but because he understood principles like the secret covenant, and he had the discipline to apply them consistently, even when everything in his culture was pulling him toward instant gratification and public recognition. You have access to the same principles, you serve the same God who gave him wisdom, and you have an opportunity right now to make a decision that will determine the trajectory of your financial future for decades to come. The question is not whether these principles work. They have been proven throughout history by those who built lasting wealth and significant legacy. The question is whether you have the maturity and the discipline to apply them in your own life, whether you are willing to delay gratification and protect what is precious for the sake of a harvest that is far greater than what you would receive if you operated the way most people do. I believe you are ready for this. I believe God has brought you to this teaching at this specific moment because He is preparing you for a level of blessing that requires the wisdom of the secret covenant to sustain. Do not take this lightly. Do not dismiss this as just another interesting concept. Recognize that you are holding something precious right now. You have been given access to a principle that most people never understand, and that many who understand it lack the discipline to implement. You are positioned for breakthrough. You are being prepared for increase. You are standing at a threshold that will determine whether your financial future is marked by the chaos and instability that comes from premature exposure, or by the steadiness and multiplication that comes from wise stewardship and strategic discretion. Choose wisely, act intentionally, and watch what happens when you align your financial practices with the wisdom that built empires and the biblical principles that govern the kingdom of God.